Members of Parliament do have constituent matters that sometimes have to take precedence over committee matters in Parliament. But let the record show that we have a quorum present and the meeting is called to order at 10:30.
Mr. Chairman. Morning. Yes, sir. I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this honourable Parliament shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. Jefferson, and thank you, sir, for returning back to the Public Accounts Committee to help us along. And at this time, we'll ask the Auditor General to give us her usual overview of the financial reporting of the Cayman Islands Government General Report, 31st of December 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you, members of the committee, colleagues and anybody listening in. Thank you for the opportunity to make some opening remarks about our Financial Audit General Report for the year 2019. This was published in December and encapsulates the main work of the office and all of the financial audits that were done at entity level during 2019, of which there's 41 entities. PAC already having called one of the entities the Turtle Centre off the back of their 2019 audit. At the time of the report, 36 out of 41 entities that make up the Cayman Islands Public Services were complete. That remains the position today. And none had received an audit qualification. And so, progress continues to be made, and this is very positive. I did issue an emphasis of matter for 9 bodies, mostly regarding non-compliance with the Section 47 of the Public Authorities Law. COVID-19 did have an impact on some bodies because obviously it came to light in March. We undertook the main audit season in March and April, during which we had the lockdown. And I would first of all like to pay credit to all our clients and particularly the staff in my office, because all staff are involved in financial audits, for achieving such a good outcome in really difficult circumstances. We also lost the Deputy Auditor General that leads the financial audit practice to do emergency response work with the NEOC. So it was a really challenging time, and I think it's a credit to everybody involved. As I say, particularly clients, as well as my own staff, that we did such a good completion. And we got 27 completed by the end of April, which is the statutory audit deadline, a further 3 by the end of June, and another 6 by December. So if you look at Exhibit 1 on page 4, we now only have 5 outstanding audits for 2019. And of those 5 entities, 2 of them, the Ministry of Health and the Airports Authority, have got 3 years of audits outstanding, and I believe you've called them as witnesses this afternoon. In terms of financial performance, all but one of core government entities made a surplus during 2019. The Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure recorded a deficit for the second year. The SAGC financial performance in 2019 was a little more mixed, with 15 of the 22 entities recording surpluses and 7 having deficits. And one of those 7, the Turtle Centre, has made a continued deficit, and you've obviously had a hearing regarding them. Cayman Airways is the other that we're concerned about, but that audit is not complete yet. And in 2019, the HSA also made a deficit. But generally, the SAGC performance has varied over the years. All public bodies are now preparing annual reports, which is another continued improvement, but we'd recommend that even more attention is given to the timely tabling those in Parliament. If you look at Exhibit 9 on page 14 of the report, it shows an upward trend in the tabling of annual reports, which is positive. But there are still very many that are not tabled in a timely way and not in accordance with the Public Management Finance Act. So at the moment we've got 51 annual reports that haven't been tabled, and 48 of those are beyond the 6 months of completion of audit, which is the requirement. With me today, as I say, it involves the whole of our office, but I've got Patrick Smith, who leads the financial audit practice, Winston Sobers, the audit manager on that side of the practice, and who really stepped up during the 2019 cycle, as I said, because Patrick was saving the country with other people, and Gabriel Nkubi, who is one of the audit project leaders, but also supported and drafted this report. Before finishing, Chairman, I'm embarrassed to say that thanks to the Financial Secretary, I do have one correction to make to my report. And I do thank the Financial Secretary for picking it up. On page 21, paragraph 71 of the conclusion says, culminating in all public bodies being issued with a qualified audit opinion. That, of course, should say unqualified. I'm terribly sorry, but I think the quality assurance is us reading what we think it should say rather than what it actually does say. So profound apologies for that. We're here and happy to support the committee with any areas of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor General. And just let me, on behalf of myself and the committee, add our thanks and appreciation to you and your audit staff and the government entities who got this work done under the COVID restrictions. And also, I want to add our disappointment and to encourage the entities to table their reports. The fact that there are 51 reports outstanding is troubling, because they need to be tabled so that the public will have access to the reports, and the accounts, the audited accounts, are only a part of the report. It is very important for the public to get an overall view of what the ministries and other entities are trying to do, and to make judgments on how they are functioning. And in absence of those reports makes that difficult. Mr. Jefferson, you know the routine. First question. Yesterday we were talking a little bit about the budgeting side of it, and I know that your ministry has just done a strategic plan. Is there anything that you think that these 5 that are behind for a couple of years, are they having any issues with the law itself, or is it just resources, or why are they not getting their accounts up to date? Have you had any response from them?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you and all the honourable committee members, to the audit office staff, and to the clerk. My name is Kenneth Jefferson. I'm the Financial Secretary and Chief Officer in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say, to start generally, that we welcome the improvement that this report speaks to, but at the same time, as you and the Auditor General have said, that the fact that we have 51 annual reports outstanding is something that definitely needs to be improved. I can say, Mr. Chairman and committee members, that frequently at the Deputy Governor's meetings with his chief officers, normally it's held every 2 weeks, but it gets a bit chaotic at times. But generally, we bring up and discuss the need to get the annual reports tabled here in Parliament. And there is a great plea from him to get them in. I've seen emails from him to all agencies encouraging that. The Minister of Finance itself too, I have written saying you need to get your accounts in and you need to get your annual reports tabled. Mr. Chairman, specifically to your question about the 5 agencies that are outstanding in terms of their audits, the one that I can speak to best would be the Ministry of Health. The others are, all statutory authorities, the Airports Authority, Housing Trust, etc. The Minister of Health, I do believe, Mr. Chairman, that the principal reason for that would be to put it down to staffing changes in the ministry over a number of years. The current chief officer was the chief CFO, chief financial officer, a number of years ago, but there have been lots of movements in that ministry, and I think that's the principal reason why that particular ministry now finds itself with 3 years of audits outstanding. And apart from that, Mr. Chairman, I don't know of any technical reason why the audits remain incomplete. I just believe it's down to personnel and staffing changes within the ministry.
Do you have any? Oh, sorry, sir. I was asking if you had any weapons that you could employ to encourage them, i.e., you don't get the next drawdown unless we but I guess that's okay.
So, Mr. Chair, just to quickly add that while the Ministry of Health is behind right now, they do have a plan agreed with Audit Office to get it rectified up to 2020 by June of this year. So we have confidence that they will be improving in the near future.
Okay, and I can hold you to that. No. Getting back to the reports. No, listen. I don't. That is not in any way intended to belittle the effort that I know the Minister of Finance has had to make to get these things. I remember where it was in 2009 when I took over as PAC, right? And the civil servants, both the audit side and the working side, need to be complimented and appreciated for that massive task of getting those accounts all up to date, and now to where we're getting the great majority of them coming in within the statutory requirements. That's not a minor achievement. But I was wondering, Mr. Jefferson, if your ministry would give some consideration to, because I know I've seen your reports and they are very good, to see if you can get the ministries to adopt that kind of a standard format to encourage them so because some of them might say, well, we don't know how to write a report, right? But I want to try to reduce the excuses so we can get it done.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see the Accountant General grabbing at the mic, so I know he has something to say as well. What I would say, Mr. Chairman, is that although I don't have it physically here with me now, we have in the Ministry of Finance, we have not necessarily professing to be the perfect agency, but we have written to ministries in the past setting out what we believe is a reasonable pro forma type document for the contents of an annual report. We have done that. It goes almost without saying, Mr. Chairman, that the law itself, the Public Management and Finance Act itself, although it's very brief, it actually specifies what the contents of an annual report should be. And as we all know, it includes the financial statements. But in terms of, beyond that, the contents itself, the report, the section 44 of the law, of the act says that it shall state the details of the entity's activities during the year. So that's very wide, and you can pretty much do whatever an entity wishes to do with that type of description. We have suggested, and this is from memory, and I'm not going to remember all of it, we have suggested in our pro forma that ministries and portfolios would detail in their annual reports legislation that they've passed in the course of the year, the amount of FOI, Freedom of Information requests that they've dealt with, any contact with the Ombudsman Office in terms of complaints, etc. And of course they have to describe, what were the major accomplishments during the course of the year for the Minister Portfolio Office. We've shown things like the makeup of the staff, male, female, Caymanians, non-Caymanians, etc. Plus some general information. Like I said, I don't have the actual pro forma that we've issued in the past, but it was issued, and it represents what we thought would be useful commentary in the annual reports, and it definitely will need updating from time to time, but we have issued that.
For those that have been tabled, there's a huge variation in the quality they're in. One is done with a lot of pictures and very expensive paper and hard covers, and others are just clipped together. So I think if we got to some kind of standardized format, we would maintain a quality across the service. I think would be good. Getting back, what kind of involvement does your ministry have, and what tools do you have at hand to try and get these people to move it along? Because you would not have been able to do your consolidated accounts if these reports are not in, right?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. I mean, that is correct. It's a fact that in order to consolidate what could be 16, 17 entities from central government, along with the 25 or 26 statutory authority government companies, then you need each of those individual parts to exist. And obviously, if they don't exist, then the consolidation process to produce a whole of government set of financial statements will not be possible. I mean, Mr. Chairman, what we've done to date in terms of encouragement is, again, at the deputy governors' meetings with chief officers, we've told those present that the deadlines are such and such. And I think by this point in time, Mr. Chairman, chief officers and CFOs are aware of the deadlines. I mean, it's not that the deadline doesn't change. The law has been there for quite some time, so they should be certainly aware of what the deadlines are. But we've certainly let them know this is the deadline for your. The law speaks to annual reports. I think what tends to happen, though, is that including the Minister of Finance, we submit the financial statements first. So we've done that for the 2020 financial year, as an example. But the annual report has to be sent to the audit office by the end of February, the 28th of February. That's the deadline for the annual report, and that's what the Act speaks to: submission of annual reports. But a big element of that is the financial statements. So we've encouraged at the deputy governors meeting. We've made it be aware, and we've written emails in the past about the annual reports, the contents, etc., the suggestions. I think by this point, Mr. Chair, there shouldn't be an issue of lack of knowledge of when deadlines are. I don't know. We as you know, sir, there are no known sanctions.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. Could one of the reasons be that there may be a conflict between the CFO and the chief officer as to who does the annual report? Because I would think that the CFO is clearly responsible for the accounts, right? And certainly I would think that the chief officer could in fact be working on drafting the annual report and stuff while the CFO is dealing with the audit office on the audit process, so that at a very minimum, when the audit process is complete, the report should be ready to go.
Mr. Chair, if I could speak to this just really quickly, because we have a background in regards to the annual reports. In 2016, the Ministry of Finance worked with Audit Office and identified a standard approach to annual reporting. In that guidance that was sent out to all CFOs, I can read directly from the wording of it. The wording is, whilst the CFO may assist the Chief Officer by providing financial data and analysis, the annual report should be the product of the Chief Officer responsible for the Ministry. So we made it clear there's a distinction between the financial statements and the actual ownership of the annual report, which is actually the Chief Officer's responsibility. But obviously CFOs are going to play a big part in providing information that feeds into that annual report.
Because one of the things I believe here that is troubling to the committee is that these ministries and these authorities that are in a backlog, unfortunately, have major capital projects ongoing. And if they can't get their recurrent stuff prepared and audited, one has to wonder what status there is the funding of their capital. And we talked about that yesterday, about how we can tighten up some of that. Okay. Mr. Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly, again, I want to say good morning and thank you for the attendance of the Financial Secretary and the Accountant General. Forgive me, I have difficulty sometimes remembering all of the titles, but certainly want to thank both for being here. I want to touch on the importance of not only presenting the financial statements, which certainly inform ministers and chief officers and members of the legislature, but the presentation of annual reports, particularly from the standpoint of how this benefits the layman, the taxpayer of this country. Annual reports and financial statements of the government are key documents that enable the House of Parliament and residents of the Cayman Islands to hold the government and individual public bodies accountable for their use of public money. But as we discussed yesterday in terms of the budget documents, the sheer size of that budget documents, and simply providing more information does not necessarily mean you are being transparent in the process. The annual report is meant to be a summary of what is contained in the financial statements, guiding the reader to better understand where taxpayer dollars have been spent and where there remain to be deficiencies. We went through a particular time where the financial statements were behind, but we've simply seemed to have turned that corner. But since, I think it was 2016, 2017, and the report that preceded this, the Auditor General's Office gave the entire public sector an adverse opinion, and one of those reasons was the absence of those annual reports, which caused reason for concern. I wonder if the Honourable Financial Secretary can tell us, have there been any discussions about the difficulties or challenges experienced by the ministries, I think the 5 at present that are outstanding, as to why their annual reports continue to sort of lag so significantly behind the presentation of the financial statements?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, to the member's question, the one that I can speak to, as I said, most confidently would be to the Ministry of Health. And the honest answer is we have not had, major extensive discussions, although the Accountant General has just said that there is now an agreed timetable for that ministry to complete its audit and to have it done by June of this year. As I said previously, Mr. Chairman, I believe that in that particular instance, the reason for the delay is more of staffing and changes within personnel in that ministry. I don't believe that it is any technical or accounting difficulties as to the explanation as to why they're behind. I don't recall, receiving any specific requests from the Ministry of Health as to accounting issues that they were having that hindered the hold up of the audit. I don't recall that. So I believe it's more to do with the staffing changes that have happened in that ministry over a period of time. I can't speak, Mr. Chairman, I can't speak confidently to the Airports Authority, to the National Housing Development Trust, to the Utilities Regulation and Competition Office, and to Cayman Airways Limited. I think the latter, Cayman Airways, just 1 year, well, the 19 years still is outstanding, but I believe that might be completed shortly. I certainly hope so. I think that's the stance I can give at the moment. We haven't had extensive discussions with them, so I'm not aware of any particular reasons why it's outstanding. Maybe the audit office could elaborate briefly.
Well, if I may certainly expand the question and share some of the audit office's thoughts, which are outlined in their executive summary of their report. And again, I appreciate that the witness really only has familiarity with the Ministry of Health and not any of the others. However, I think from the report, the audit office fears perhaps it's more than just staffing changes that are behind these delays. The executive summary, if I may quote just a few brief sentences, it says the financial results reported by statutory authorities and government companies present a mixed and varied picture. 15 out of the 22 audited statutory authorities and government-owned companies recorded surpluses, while the remaining 7 made deficits. The Public Service Pension Board, the Water Authority of the Cayman Islands, Segregated Insurance Fund, and the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority are among the entities that recorded the largest surpluses, whilst the Health Services Authority, the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Centre Limited, Port Authority of the Cayman Islands, and the National Housing Development Trust recorded the largest deficits. And of those, the accounts demonstrate that there is a considerable proportion of them that continue to show signs of being under financial strain. The Auditor General goes on to state that, in their opinion, these challenges will likely to continue to be the case in most instances without any changes in operations, business restructuring, or ongoing and further government support or changes in government policy. I use Ofreg as an example. Ofreg has gone through major staffing changes, leadership changes, and putting key personnel in necessary positions, but it has not changed the way it reports to the legislator, and certainly in terms of government policy, there isn't that feeling that the government policy and Ofreg are on the same page. But specifically to the Auditor General's office comments that their concern is that it's going to get worse before it gets better, and in particular, it's more than just staffing matters that are affecting or impacting these departments. I wonder if there's been any indication by yourself and your office if there are other overarching issues and concern outside of staffing that may be troubling to you as Financial Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I thank Member Harris for his observations, and certainly would say that his comments are understood. Just as a tangent to say that he mentioned from the executive summary some of those entities that had large deficits, and one that I recall best would be the Health Services Authority, because thanks to the audit office staff, we do get sent to us the copies of the audited financial statements for all entities really. And I remember specifically the Health Services Authority. What they have done recently is they have recognized their health benefits, healthcare liability directly in their financial statements. That has led to I believe the HSA having essentially negative net assets because the amount was so large. And as a follow-on to that as well, there was an impact on their, if you like, income statement, which caused them was a principal reason why they had a deficit. Mr. Chairman, to try to answer the member's question directly, so that was just a tangent to say that it is possible that as more and more entities recognize healthcare liabilities and the genuine cost of healthcare, that in itself might result in future deficits occurring more and more frequently. Obviously, the point that the member makes is important because if statutory authorities and government companies are incurring deficits, that obviously puts a pressure on the government to actually support them if they do believe that that particular entity is worthwhile continuing, which in turn puts pressure on the government's own operations to support the previous level of expenditures that the government itself has been incurring, which in turn then leads you to the question of the chairman's point yesterday. Well, are we going to then focus on revenues? Because if your expenditures are going up, then is that going to lead to revenue increases which would impact the public? I think, and we obviously cannot attribute these deficits to COVID because we're dealing with the 2019 financial year end. So we can't say that these deficits arose because of COVID. So the point is understood. It does have an impact on government. I think, Mr. Chairman, the conclusion I would reach is that the governments, the individual ministries and portfolios that are responsible need to have a discussion with the statutory authority government companies to understand and to arrive at a conclusion. Are these going to be ongoing deficits in the future? What is the magnitude of them? We in the Ministry of Finance haven't had those individual discussions at all with those entities, but it does actually need to happen. And our viewpoint would be, well, the best place agencies to do that would be their parent agents.
Thank you.
So, just one follow-up on that.
Yeah, I was going to stick with the surplus and deficit because you made a very good lead.
Just one follow-up. Is there a particular reason why ministries are not insisting that the board of these companies, such as the Turtle Farm, for instance, as an example, we know they messed that in because they were before the committee here, right? That they develop a multi-year plan to reduce the deficit to zero. I mean, in the case of the Turtle Center, the government has been giving him $10 million for as long as I can remember, and it is one thing to get these agencies to do capital development, right? But that capital development should have in the planning stages a component of how the unit is going to pay for it. And it is even worse, like in a Turtle Center, where we're subsidizing recurrent expenditure and staff are being paid bonuses and hard-working civil servants are not getting in there. Is there anything your ministry can do to try to get these other ministries to at least request from these entities and these boards some plan to over a period of time to reduce that deficit to zero? Whether that's enhancement of the current revenue measures, either the collectability thereof or the expansion of their clientele, but they should be made to do something to address the deficit. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think certainly the Ministry of Finance can assist in that process, and I thank you and the members for the observation. Obviously, the Auditor General for bringing it in the report. As we were discussing yesterday, Mr. Chairman, the Minister of Finance, the financial sector, does actually have that legal ability to request. I was struggling to find a particular section, but it does actually have that ability to request information from not only central government agencies, but also from statutory authorities and government companies as well. I think it's section 46, but I won't bore us with the actual details there. But the legal ability for that information to be requested, that legal ability does exist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the surplus and deficits question, and I want to thank the Honourable Financial Secretary for mentioning the importance of ensuring that public bodies and statutory authorities and government-owned companies maintain surplus budgeting as opposed to deficit budgeting, because of the challenge it places on the core government to achieve its strategic policy statements and outcomes. As the old saying goes, any chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and certainly having departments and ministries struggling to produce surplus budgeting presents a challenge to any government administration, certainly as the one that presently exists or the one that existed prior to this term have pledged to produce surplus budgets. I think we can all appreciate the importance of those surpluses, and if you don't appreciate it, certainly 2020 was a reminder that those years of surpluses do in fact have a purpose. It is that saving for a rainy day, and certainly 2020 it rained cats and dogs, and that surplus was extremely useful, whilst at the time many persons found all sorts of creative ways in which we could spend that surplus, but that's the point behind a rainy day fund. So when we talk about surplus and deficits, it's not simply a matter to brag, oh, look how much money we saved, or look where we didn't spend the money, but more importantly, providing that contingency fund for when the bottom does drop out. And again, I use 2020 COVID-19 scenario as a living, breathing example. I'm also grateful to the Financial Secretary for being able to identify some of the factors that are leading to the deficits, particularly in the Health Services Ministry, where you talk about healthcare liabilities. We see these challenges both in the provision of healthcare, but also likewise in the provision of health insurance, and how these liabilities and the costs associated with it certainly have a much broader impact. And I think, again, this is useful information that would guide the public, the residents of the Cayman Islands, to not only understand how their money is being spent, but also the challenges associated with providing better value for money on things like health insurance, on things like the cost of healthcare. I want to touch, though, on the surpluses, and in particular the entities that have recorded surpluses, 15 out of 22, according to the Auditor General's recent report. Can you state whether or not the requirement for public bodies to pay back their annual surpluses to Treasury is in fact happening? And if they are not, what are the challenges, the reasons associated with those entities that are not paying back those surpluses back into core government or Treasury?
Yes, thank you, Member Harris, for that question. There is definitely a requirement for the central government agencies to repay surpluses that arise at the end of the financial year to the Treasury. I mean, I paused there for a bit because I'm was considering, if you're a member of the public listening and hearing it, it just sounds a bit weird to say that a ministry portfolio makes a surplus and then it has to pay it back. That just sounds kind of confusing. I think, Mr. Chairman, the FMI, if I can put it to try and make it more understandable, the FMI initiative, when it was established, one of the things that it dealt with was this: if a ministry or portfolio or office was able to manage its expenses and its revenues such that it made a surplus, there was a possibility that because of that good management, the agency, the ministry, got rewarded by being able to keep some of those surpluses. And keeping surpluses really means keeping cash at the end of the year. And the ministry portfolio office that made the surplus could then spend that cash on areas that perhaps were not in the next year's budget. So so it was a reward. I think that was the concept of surpluses and so forth. The public management and finance law talks about those surpluses, which really means cash returned to the Treasury. So we have this complicated system where each individual ministry and portfolio has, in many cases, several bank accounts for the entity itself. In addition to that, the Cabinet and Treasury also has the parent bank account. So what Member Harris is speaking to is a situation in which, at the end of a financial year, a ministry portfolio that has a surplus, they have to write to me, the financial secretary, to request that they be able to retain that surplus, which means that they be able to retain that cash that corresponds to the surplus in their own entity bank account. So they have to write to me to say, can I keep it? The vast majority of entities do not do that. They do not write to say, can I keep my surplus? Can I keep my surplus cash? They don't do that. The chief financial officers in each ministry portfolio would write into the Treasury to say that my ministry experienced a surplus of X dollars for the 2019 or the 2020 financial year. You can therefore move that same X dollars surplus in the form of cash. You can move that from my entity bank account back into the Cabinet's, the Treasury's main bank account. That's the situation within central government. It's usually one or two of the entities that write and say, can I keep my surplus cash? When you extend that then to the statutory authorities and government companies, the public authorities law also speaks to statutory authorities, government companies that have cash balances that exceed a level of bank account balances sufficient to cover 90 days of expenditure. Those excess cash balances by the public authorities law should at the moment be also paid into government. But that hasn't gone down well, to put it in blunt terms. And the situation that we're in now is that the Cabinet has the legal ability to do so. The Cabinet has issued consistently for the last couple of years, has issued an exemption to the statutory authorities to say you don't actually have to pay over your excess cash beyond this 90-day level to us. You don't have to do it because, for example, in practical terms, an authority would pay it over, and something comes up in the course of the following year, and there would be a need for that cash to be returned. So in lieu of that happening, there's also a separate situation where there is a dividend formula that's being established for statutory authorities and government companies to abide by. So we did not, there was never the intention that the statutory authorities and government companies would have to pay over excess cash beyond the 90-day expenditure level, and as well pay over a dividend. There was never the intention that it be both. It was only the intention that there be one. So to take care of, to eliminate one of those streams, there's the exemption that Cabinet has issued year after year to stop that happening. There has been a paper that went to Cabinet that attempted to change the Public Authorities Law to eliminate that particular section that said that a statutory authority had to pay over excess cash at the end, following the end of a financial year. That paper did not succeed. It may be that it will be, brought back again later on, but certainly the intention is that statutory authorities and government companies, when they make surpluses, they be asked to pay a dividend, as opposed to pay a dividend and also pay over excess cash. So to complete the answer, Mr. Chairman, that's the situation I've just described with the statutory authorities and government companies, and with central government, we are talking about the end of a financial year, surplus is being made, they're generally taken back from those agencies and put back into the Treasury's, the Cabinet's main bank account.
Just one other question, Mr. Chairman. Again, when we talk about the importance of annual reports accompanying financial statements, and both need to be submitted and tabled in a timely manner because they inform not only the House of Parliament but also the residents of the Cayman Islands. One of the other ongoing observations made by the Auditor General in the course of the last 4 or 5 years is not just the submission of these documents in the form of the annual reports and financial statements on the table as well as available online, but in particular, the amount of updates that ministries, statutory authorities, and government-owned companies provide to their own individual websites. We live in a digital age. The average person is not going to come down to the Legislative Assembly to request documents that they would otherwise be able to access from the palm of their hands. And from a standpoint of efficiency as well as accountability, a website provides an avenue to satisfy both of these needs. I wonder if you can tell this committee, in addition to the challenges of presenting annual reports to accompany financial statements, what are government-owned companies and public authorities doing to improve their website content, which serves as a method of being transparent to the taxpayers of this country?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's obvious that their statutory authorities and government companies' own websites are, a logical place and a sensible place to place those annual reports. I can't say, Mr. Chairman, that the Ministry of Finance has actually done a survey and gone and surfed each of those locations to see if the website, if the annual accounts, annual reports, are published there. But it is a sensible place to do it, and we would certainly encourage the chief officers responsible for the SAGCs to, if that isn't the case now, that it be done, that it be brought up to date. I can certainly undertake to do an exercise to check to see what the exact status is as of now. I don't believe I can say anything other than that, than to say that if it isn't up to date, it doesn't reflect the latest position, then we can make contact with the chief officer, with the CEO, MD of the authority, with the board chairman, etc. We can actually do that.
Just one caution with putting them on their websites. please ensure that that does not in any way eliminate the requirement to table them in-house. Because if you eliminate that process, you're eliminating a important democratic process. Because if a report from one of these entities brought here, it can be rejected by motion so that the whole report is debated, or even a motion to accept it, right? So there are instances where members of parliament will have a responsibility to get reports debated so that the public understands, whether for good or bad, what is going on. Because if you just put them on the website, the average Caymanian will not have access to it, or will never know what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following on from Mr. Harris's line of questioning regarding deficits, what are the Minister of Finance concerns with regard to public bodies recording year-to-year deficits, and what measures or support is being given to these entities to address their financial state? I noticed that in the Audit General's report, the Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure has recorded deficits in both the 2019 and the 2018 financial years. So can you speak to what you all are doing with regard to addressing that issue with that ministry?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was checking to see if the Accountant General knew if you've made any specific efforts to address that. The answer, Mr. Chairman, is that the Minister of Finance has thus far not reached out to ascertain if there's an ongoing a problem with that ministry. So I really can't answer the members' question about what efforts we've done in that regard. It's obvious that we do not want that situation to exist, and in fact the strict legal position is that deficits should not occur. At worst, we should have a break-even situation. So deficits should not occur. We should have break-even or surplus positions within each individual ministry and portfolio and office, so that the government as a whole either breaks. Sorry, I make that correction, Mr. Chairman. Government has to have a surplus, even if it's $1. So even a break-even position is, strictly speaking, not acceptable. So individual ministries and portfolios should be making surpluses as well.
Because all of those ministries have the option to request supplementary expenditure before they do a program that puts them in deficit.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, to answer Member Connolly's question fully, I'm concluding by saying that we will reach out to the Ministry of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure to ascertain whether there is a fundamental ongoing issue that's caused the deficit. I want to say no, because in prior years we did not get that ministry with a deficit situation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. To the witness, just following on the timeliness of the financial statements, just reverting back to that. What are the consequences, if any, faced by the public bodies as a result of the late submissions to the Auditor General's Office of annual reports and annual financial statements? Are there any consequences as a result thereof?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Member Conley. I think I'd start by saying that to my knowledge, there are no legal consequences. So there's no sanctioned within the Public Management and Finance Act for lateness. I think what it does, so in practical terms, I think what it does is it probably erodes the confidence of the public in good management being exercised by the government of the day. So good governance issues comes into play. The public wants to know, how its dollars that it has actually paid over to the government is being spent. So to me it's a public confidence issue, a consequence as the main consequence of untimely submission of financial statements. If we were to extend that, there are other practical reasons as well, Mr. Chairman. If we were to extend that, for example, to statutory authorities and government companies, if they are late and they get into a situation where they need financing, then typically a bank would say, can you give me your latest financial statements? And if they're 2 years behind, that makes it difficult for financing to be obtained. But for central government agencies themselves, their lateness, there's no legal consequence at the moment, apart from like I said, the public erosion of good governance being in existence. There is perhaps the embarrassment of forums like this where the issue is publicly aired. Would be my answers as consequences. I think the statutory authorities have a greater practical consequence to lateness if that does arise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to thank the witness for the testimony being provided, and I also want to continue to commend the oversight body, the Financial Secretary and the Accountant General, but also the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development for what the Auditor General has also indicated was an improvement in the process of the delivery of financial statements and annual reports. It also noted, I think in paragraph 16 of the Auditor General report contained on page 7, that 36 audits for the financial year 2019 have been completed and all have received an unqualified audit opinion. However, have included emphasis on matter or other matter in 9 of the 36 audits. Most significant in these other matters is the compliance of public bodies with the Public Authorities Law, Section 47. Non-compliance with the Public Authorities Law, non-compliance. And I think this is a particular point that is, I think, a key point and observation of our esteemed chairman, certainly from the floor of the Legislative Assembly in recent years. In March 2017, the Legislative Assembly passed the Public Authorities Law, and it commenced on June 1st, 2017, with the exception of Section 47, which covered salary scales and job evaluations. Section 47 was slated to commence on the 1st of June 2018, but was later deferred to June 2019. In conducting the 2019 audits, the Office of the Auditor General noted a number of key sections of the Public Authorities Law that has directly affected the level of legislative compliance of some of the statutory authorities that were flagged. The most significant of these matters related to Section 47 of the Public Authorities Law. And I think for completeness, I think the key issue here that is noted as a gap in the documents prepared is that the Public Authorities Law requires all statutory authorities and government-owned companies to use the same salary scale. as determined by Cabinet, and all jobs are to be evaluated by the same job evaluation methodology. The Public Authorities Law also requires that after the date of the commencement, where there is a difference between the terms and conditions of employment at a public authority and the civil service, the salary grades for remuneration in the public authority shall be adjusted accordingly to reduce such differences. Again, we're seeing some of these challenges and salary adjustments, as we talked about earlier on in previous hearings that have come before the Public Accounts Committee, the Cayman Turtle Center as an example. But I wonder if the Honourable Financial Secretary can explain to this committee what the status is of the compliance of public bodies with PAL 47 as it relates to their financial statements, and again, the emphasis on matter or other matter opinions that the Auditor General have shared in 9 out of 36 audits.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just briefly elaborating on what Member Harris has said, just to ensure that the listening public understands as well. The issue here is that, as Member Harris has said, there is a legal requirement for the statutory authorities and government companies to bring their remuneration that they pay their staff to be fairly consistent with if they can find an equivalent post within central government. So if you are an accountant in a statutory authority and government company, what is that salary compared to a chief financial officer within government? So that is the exercise that the public authority law actually requires to be done. And that was to have started effective, as the member said, June 19. And since we are dealing with the December 2019 year end, that has a direct bearing on the 31st of December 2019 accounts, and hence the Auditor General notes it in its in their report as being, although not rising to the level of a qualification, it is pointing out that it is an important matter, and so it's described. The technical term is an emphasis of matter. It's being brought to the reader's attention that there's something important going on with this particular issue. So, Mr. Chairman, the possibilities at the end of the exercise having been completed to compare the remuneration in statutory authorities with, if possible, their equivalent position in government, the possibilities are that there's no need. One possibility is that there's no need for change at all in the remuneration level within the statutory authority. That's one possibility. The other possibilities would be that the expenditures level actually need to increase. And I think that's more likely to be the concern, that the expenditure levels in the statutory authority might actually need to increase. And so there's uncertainty and doubt there. I think the wording of the law is such that, and in all practical terms, the expenditure level within the statutory authority wouldn't actually decrease if it was the case that they were being paid more than the equivalent within government. So those are the three possibilities. The effective date, June 19, means that the 19 financials have been impacted by that, or it's a audit issue for the 19 financial year. I know because we just got it this morning. We did check with the Portfolio Civil Service, and we have an update which I would ask the Accountant General to share as to the status of this exercise.
Mr. Chairman, we've gotten an update from the Portfolio Civil Service and the Deputy Governor, who are heading up this exercise, as they're responsible for the job evaluations. As of December, all entities, all SAGCs, with the exception of the National Roads Authority, have either completed the process of having their jobs evaluated on the government methodology, or they're in the process. The National Roads Authority is the only exception. Of the 16 smaller entities, that is any with less than 100 employees, they're all completed. Of the 8 larger entities, that is more than 100 employees, 7 are in the process of being reevaluated on the government's methodology.
Is part of the delay here is that too much emphasis is being placed on reduction of salaries, i.e. that the statutory authorities' salaries are being reduced to comply with government levels, when it may be easier to get it done if the civil service looked at it as an opportunity to raise civil servants' pay, because the statutory bodies are out there competing more closely in the private sector, and sometimes, I'm not saying it's all the times, sometimes their salary scales might better reflect what the market is demanding. And I think the information that has come to me over the period of time is that many of the public authorities and statutory bodies feel that the exercise being done by government is to reduce their salary scales as opposed to looking at a realistic marketable level and maybe bringing up some of the core, the central civil servant salaries.
Mr. Chair, I guess it could be a mixture it could be a number of different things at play, because the higher end salaries, so those CEOs and SAGCs, may be higher paid than the equivalent in the civil service, like a chief officer. However, I think there's also the other end of the spectrum where the entry-level post in an SAGC may actually be remunerated lower than those in the civil service, because obviously we have a certain base pay. So it could be a combination of things, but I think the delay is just the massive quantity of public servants. I think it's over 2,000 employees that need to be evaluated. I'm not sure how many posts that equates to, but it is just a large exercise in general.
Unfortunately, I've been around long enough with this public authorities law to know that during the genesis of it came out as this law has to be put in place to control runaway public authorities and statutory companies. And some of that, I believe, had substance to it. But I think over the period of time, right, we need to find a way to get this done. And I think part of it might be that instead of simply looking to bring the statutory authorities down where they're above, is to bring the civil servants up or come to some kind of halfway compromise or something, you know? Because I know of at least one instance where a CEO was handed a contract renewal with a substantial reduction in benefits, and he says, look, you know, I ain't taking that, and walked away. And what but you probably wouldn't know this, but in the process of evaluating this to comply with this section of the law, has the government got a actuary to value what the social benefits of a central civil servant, i.e. pension and health care, is versus what the statutory authorities and public authorities? Well, you know, my position is that there should be no difference. Anything owned by government should be in Seneco and in government pension plan. And it should have been that way 15 years ago, but it's not that way. I think you mentioned the HSA early on, and I believe even today, the HSA is using a private sector to provide them with health insurance, which seems kind of, you know, but anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Deputy Governor, when setting the tone for the civil service, stated that his goal is to achieve a world-class civil service throughout the various government ministries, departments, and statutory authorities and government-owned companies. A key part of achieving that status is compliance with the Public Management and Finance Law and relates to the provision of tabling annual reports at the same time as financial statements are tabled and having them audited in a timely manner. Another aspect of achieving this success is also ensuring compliance with the ever-changing accounting standards. A world-class civil service suggests that it is one that complies with global standard or global best practice. In terms of accounting standards, in 2019, one financial reporting standard came into effect that had a significant and material implication on a number of statutory authorities and government-owned companies, and that was specifically the IFRS 16, which dealt with lease instruments, and certainly the government leases a number of properties, either as the home for the ministries and departments or the service providers in which the government delivers services to the general public. I wonder if the Financial Secretary can state, in addition to reminding government-owned companies, departments, and ministries of their requirement to be compliant with both the Public Authorities Law and the Public Management and Finance Law, what is your office doing to ensure that all public entities are also kept abreast of any new accounting standards that would otherwise be applicable to their financial reporting?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to ask the Accountant General to address that because his department, the Treasury Department, provides that such a technical advice.
Mr. Chairman, through you. The Treasury Department annually conducts training on the IPSAS standards. We also strongly push the training of the AICPA. They have an annual summit, normally in November, December each year. But separate and apart from that, the Treasury Department also provides 1 or 2 day training on the actual standards itself, because the IPSAS training, the CEPA training, can be more related generally to accounting and so on. So we want to have specific training on IPSAS, and that is passed out to all SAGCs and all government ministries and portfolios. In 2020, unfortunately, that training was delayed and only conducted this month because issues with coordinating and everything, we were unable to have it conducted in 2020, and so we had it conducted this month. We also had training in December, but the actual training on the standards was conducted this month. So we annually try to have the training on the standards done for all staff. Additionally, we issued instructions in regards to COVID expenditure just this morning, actually, as ministries and portfolios are in the process of preparing their accounts for audit and are due to submit them by the end of February. So we issued some general guidance and advised that if they have any specific questions that's not covered in the general guidance, to please contact us and we would assist with that.
Can we ask you to make sure that the audit office has some record and maybe input into that training and get. Oh, okay.
Just before we depart with the Financial Secretary, I think it's important, for the public to understand where we've come in this whole process. And I just want to note a few key observations made by the Auditor General's Office in this regard. In her conclusion, in the office's conclusions and recommendations contained on their general report for the 2019 financial audits, it states the quality of financial reporting has improved significantly over recent years, culminating into all public bodies being issued with a qualified audit opinion so far for their financial statements. There's also been a marked, unqualified, excuse me, yes, correction. Yeah. There has also been a marked increase in the number of entities preparing and tabling annual reports rather than only financial statements, thereby meeting a key requirement of the Public Management and Finance Law and enhancing the level of accountability to key stakeholders. This is a story of progress, the office observes in paragraph 74. It also states that I have also observed a reduction in the various control deficiencies that existed, and although there are still a number of entities with some key areas of control weaknesses, there has been a decrease overall in the number of matters my office has identified that need to be corrected. I just want to say congratulations to the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development for the hard work put into this key issue of financial statements and annual reporting, because we have come a long way. And I think it is important that obviously we are not all aces yet, but it would be wrong of this committee not to recognize the significant progress that the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development has made in this matter, and certainly want to continue to encourage the continuation of achieving the desired outcomes as identified by the Auditor General's Office. Again, just to highlight the most significant accountability and efficiency improvements that have been recommended are three. One is the timely laying of annual reports, including the financial statements and audit opinions, in the House of Parliament. Two, the publication on that public body and Parliament websites to improve accountability. And three, stronger functional leadership being provided to all public bodies through the Ministry of Finance. I thank you, Honourable Financial Secretary, for you and your staff and the hard work and that of the Accountant General, and I felt it is important that we not lose sight of this progress, and particularly the public listening in, not lose sight that we have, as the old Virginia Slims commercial said, come a long way, baby, in this issue. We have a little bit of work yet to do, but the signs and the expectations of success are positive. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank Member Harris for his comments. And also to say quickly, sir, that the government has done extremely well in improving, I think, as the report acknowledges, the financial statements component of the annual reports, the dollars and cents document. We've done quite well at that. I think as an example, for it may be mentioned in the report, I don't know the specific paragraph. For the financial year that ended June the 30th, 2010, there were no entities that received a clean opinion. None. I think 83% were qualified, meaning that there was issues with them, and around about 17% were disclaimed of some sort. So that was a position in June 2010. If you fast forward to December 31st, 19, which is the report that we're looking at now, there are some audits to be done, but of the audits that have been completed, all of them are clean. I think there's about 5 more to go. But we could end up with a situation, it's possible to end up in a situation where for 19, we have 100% of the entities with clean opinions on their financial statements. What we're not as good as at the moment is the annual reports and tabling, and that has been clear from today and from the report. And the Auditor General, I think in her opening summary, said that they are 5-to-1 51 annual reports that are still on tabled here, from a number of years ago. And I'd certainly be we will be writing to the Auditor General to just request, a listing of those 51 annual reports that are on table. And to say, Mr. Chairman, that before coming here this morning, I did have a very brief discussion with the Minister for Finance and told him, about the session today and the situation with the annual reports outstanding. And I think he was a bit taken aback by the fact that there were as many as 51 that were untabled, and so he certainly wanted to get a listing to know which ones were outstanding. So I'll be contacting the audit office to get such a list. And as I say, the Honourable Deputy Governor at his frequent meetings with chief officers, he does encourage very strongly that as soon as the annual reports are available, they should be tabled. And I think, Mr. Chairman, just to round this off, there has been a bit of confusion, and it shouldn't be, but there's been a bit of confusion that annual reports are what are required to be tabled here. The financial statements are not required to be tabled here, but ministers and portfolios have done that in the past. But it's really the annual reports that are important, inclusive of financial statements. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to add something. Going back to yesterday's session on budgeting, there were two recommendations in there that, although quite rightly made to the civil service, actually impacted the way the Parliament operates. And one of those was regarding Section 11.5 supplementary budgets, where often they weren't done in a timely way. I think there's a correlation between that and the laying of annual reports. And one thing I would like to say was the other recommendation we made was that there should be a regular and routine meeting of the Parliament so that things can be complied with in a timely way, because PMFL requires that within 6 months of the audit being completed, that these are laid in the House, and often they're not. That's in addition to the ones we've got outstanding. And a thing that would really help there, and it would require all of the political members of the House and the House authorities, is for a more routine and regular meeting of the House. Thank you.
Yeah, that's been my perennial song from my soapbox. We just can't meet 3 days every 6 months and do 40 laws and forget all of the good work that we need to do. In this modern day, this Parliament needs to be meeting at a minimum 1 day every 2 weeks with a rolling agenda so that things can get done in a timely fashion. But I, as I said earlier, I think that the civil service and the audit office, there's not enough accolades that can be given to them to come from where we were in 2010 to where we are in 2020. And I would just like to suggest to the Minister of Finance that I know COVID is going to get blamed for a lot of things, but the fact that we could get the audits done during COVID, we cannot now let some departments slip by claiming that I didn't have time to do this during COVID and keep the accounts up to date, because it's important, having got there, that we stay there. And I can tell you from my involvement in the Commonwealth Public Accounts Association, there aren't too many other countries. In fact, I would go down a limb and say that I believe Cayman is probably the only one that is doing audits and tabling them and Auditor General's report in the year after the account that we do. I don't think there's any other country in the Commonwealth that is at that stage. And that is no small accomplishment. So, but thank you all very much. Mr. Tibbetts, since you were under oath from yesterday, I didn't swear you today, but I thank you for the answers for your questions. Now you're released from your oath. The meeting is adjourned until 1:30.